Help! The kids are falling! The crowd's screams pierce the air as two boys plummet toward the raging river, their small hands flailing. Panic grips the onlookers at Riverfront Brew, hearts racing, eyes wide with dread. In that split second, a lone figure dives in, a waitress Talia, risking everything to save them. But what follows isn't gratitude. It's betrayal, accusations, and a storm of prejudice that threatens to drown her courage. This isn't just a rescue. It's a battle for truth, where one woman's bravery exposes lies and reshapes a town. Her fight will leave you stunned, her strength unforgettable. Share where you're watching from and what time it is in the comments, and hit that subscribe button to join us for more stories that ignite hope. Stick around, secrets unravel, and justice rises in ways you won't see coming. You think you can play hero to scam me, you lowlife? Robert Carson's voice sliced through the air, venom dripping from every syllable. His face, flushed red, loomed over Talia, a 26-year-old black waitress, as she stood drenched, shivering on the riverbank outside Riverfront Brew. Her uniform clung to her skin, heavy with river water, her chest heaving from the effort of pulling his twin sons, James and Liam, from the churning rapids. The crowd of white patrons, their coffee cups frozen mid-sip, stared in stunned silence. Talia's fists clenched, her nails biting into her palms, as Robert's accusations landed like punches. "I saved your boys," she fired back, her voice raw but steady. Her eyes burned with defiance, though her soaked sneakers squelched against the muddy ground. The river roared behind her, a cruel echo of the chaos she'd just escaped. "Save them," Robert sneered, stepping closer, his polished shoes scuffing the dirt. "You expect me to believe that? You pushed them in, didn't you? Thought you'd stage a little rescue to squeeze money out of me." His words cut deep, laced with the sting of racial contempt. The crowd murmured, some faces hardening with suspicion, others shifting uncomfortably. A woman in a sundress clutched her purse tighter, her lips pursed. Talia's jaw tightened, teeth grinding as she fought the urge to scream. "I saw them slip. I jumped in. That's it." Her words were sharp, each one a shield against his venom. Her heart pounded, not from fear but from the weight of his lies. She'd felt the icy water choke her lungs, the boy's small hands slipping in hers. Yet here she stood, accused of malice. "Don't lie to me," Robert snapped, cutting her off. His hand jabbed the air inches from her face. "People like you always have an angle, always looking for a payout." The phrase "people like you" hung heavy, a coded slur that made Talia's stomach churn. Her eyes flicked to the crowd, searching for a single ally. Most looked away, their silence louder than Robert's rage. "I don't want your money," Talia said, her voice low, trembling with restrained fury. Her hands shook, not from the cold but from the injustice searing through her. She'd risked her life, felt the river's pull threaten to drag her under, all to save two kids who weren't hers. And now this? "You think I'm stupid?" Robert barked, his voice drowning hers. "I know you're kind. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. I'll have you in court for endangering my sons." His finger pointed like a weapon, his eyes narrowing with disgust. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of shock and judgment. A man in a polo shirt whispered to his wife. Maybe she did set it up. Talia's breath hitched, her chest tight as if the river still pressed against it. She wanted to shout, to make them see the truth, but Robert's tirade left no room. His words were a relentless storm, each one stripping away her dignity. She glanced at James and Liam, the twins, huddled nearby, wrapped in towels, their pale faces wide-eyed and trembling. They knew what she'd done. They'd felt her hands pulling them to safety. "You're wrong," she said, her voice cutting through his, her eyes locked onto his, unyielding. "I don't need to scam anyone. I did what was right." Her words carried a quiet power, a spark that made Robert pause for a split second, his brow twitching. But he shook it off, his sneer returning. "We'll see about that," he hissed, turning to the crowd as if rallying an army. "You all saw her! She's no hero!" The accusation echoed, a final blow that left Talia standing alone, the river's cold bite still clinging to her skin. She straightened, her shoulders squaring despite the weight of his words, her eyes catching a glint of sunlight on the water. A flicker of hope amid the storm. Talia's chest burned, her pulse hammering in her ears as Robert Carson's accusations echoed through the crowd. Her soaked uniform stuck to her skin, the river's chill seeping into her bones. But she stood taller, her spine rigid like steel. The crowd's eyes bore into her, some cold with judgment, others flickering with unease. Robert's final jab, "You're no hero," hung in the air, a blade aimed at her heart. Her fists tightened, knuckles whitening, as she swallowed the urge to scream back. She wouldn't crumble. Not here. Not now. "You'll regret this," Robert spat, his voice low and menacing, his finger still pointing like a loaded gun. "I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are." His words dripped with contempt, each one a fresh wound. Talia's lips pressed into a thin line, her jaw clenching so hard her teeth ached. She could feel the crowd's gaze shift, some nodding in agreement with Robert, their whispers cutting deeper than his shouts. A woman in a floral blouse muttered, "She's just a waitress. Why would she risk that?" Talia's eyes flicked to James and Liam, the twins she'd pulled from the river's grasp. Their small faces, pale and shivering, stared back, wide-eyed, lips trembling. She saw the truth in their eyes. They knew she'd saved them. That was enough. She didn't need Robert's approval or the crowd's applause. Her heart steadied, her resolve hardening like iron forged in fire. "I don't regret saving your sons," she said, her voice calm but sharp, slicing through the tension. "I'd do it again. Truth doesn't bend to your lies." Each word was deliberate, a quiet defiance that made Robert's eyes narrow. The crowd hushed, a few heads turning as her words landed. A man in a baseball cap shifted, his brow furrowing, as if her conviction cracked his doubt. Robert scoffed, cutting her off before she could say more. "Save your excuses for court," he snapped, turning to the crowd for support. "She's playing you all." But Talia didn't flinch. Her hands unclenched, her fingers trembling, not from fear, but from the fire burning inside her. She'd grown up in a world that tried to make her feel small, her mother scrubbing floors, her brother dodging taunts at school. She'd learned early to stand tall, to let hate slide off her like water. "I'm done here," she said, her voice steady, carrying a weight that silenced the murmurs. She turned, her wet sneakers squelching against the gravel, and walked away from Robert's glare. Her steps were slow, deliberate, each one a rejection of his venom. The crowd parted, some avoiding her gaze, others watching with a mix of shame and awe. A young woman clutching a coffee cup whispered to her friend, "She didn't have to save those kids. She's stronger than he thinks." Talia's heart pounded, not from defeat but from a quiet fury. She'd risked her life, felt the river's icy claws, and now bore the sting of Robert's words. Yet she held her head high, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the river met the sky. She wouldn't let his lies define her. As she reached the edge of the cafe's patio, she paused, her breath catching. In the distance, a phone's flash blinked. Someone had recorded the whole thing. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. The truth was out there, waiting to break free. Robert Carson stormed into his sleek, glass-walled office, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. His face, still flushed from the confrontation at Riverfront Brew, twisted with a mix of fury and unease. Talia's parting words, "Truth doesn't bend to your lies," clawed at his mind, each syllable a splinter he couldn't shake. He slumped into his leather chair, his fingers drumming the desk, his jaw tight. The image of her standing tall, drenched but defiant, haunted him. He'd called her a lowlife, a scammer, but her eyes had burned with a conviction that made his gut twist. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. A notification from an unknown number. He opened it and a video loaded, grainy but unmistakable. Talia, her dark hair plastered to her face, plunged into the churning river, her arms straining as she pulled James and Liam to safety. Their small hands clung to her, their faces pale with fear. The footage cut off just as she dragged them to the bank, her chest heaving, her eyes scanning for danger. Robert's breath caught, his fingers gripping the phone. She hadn't hesitated. She'd risked everything. "Daddy, she saved us," James's voice echoed in his memory, small but certain, from moments after the rescue. Liam had nodded, his eyes wide. "She jumped in so fast." Robert's throat tightened, a bitter taste rising. He'd ignored them, too consumed by his own assumptions to listen. His sons, safe because of her, and he'd spat in her face. His hand raked through his hair, tugging hard, as if pain could drown the shame creeping up his spine. He replayed the video, his eyes narrowing. Something caught his attention. A figure in the background, half hidden by the crowd, standing near the riverbank as Talia fought the current. The figure wore a dark jacket, face obscured, but their stillness was eerie, almost deliberate. Robert froze the frame, his heart pounding. Who was that? Why didn't they help? His phone buzzed again, another message from the same unknown number. A photo this time, a blurry close-up of the same figure, holding something small, maybe a cloth, with a faint embroidered mark. The message read, "You blamed the wrong person?" Robert's pulse raced, his fingers trembling as he zoomed in. The mark on the cloth looked familiar, like something he'd seen in his own office. His mind flashed to Carl, his manager, always lurking, always quick to point fingers. Carl had been at the cafe that day, hadn't he? Robert's stomach churned, doubt gnawing at him. Had he lashed out at Talia to cover his own failure to watch his sons? Or was there something darker at play? He stood pacing, his shoes scuffing the floor. Talia's face flashed in his mind, her steady gaze, her refusal to break. He called her a liar, but this video, these messages, told a different story. His fists clenched, knuckles whitening. He wanted to dismiss it, to cling to his anger, but the truth was clawing its way out. He'd been wrong, dead wrong, and yet pride held him back, a heavy chain around his chest. "Daddy?" James's voice broke through as the twins burst into the room, their school bags slung over their shoulders. "Why did you yell at Talia?" Liam's eyes, usually bright, were clouded with confusion. "She saved us. She's nice." Robert's throat closed, his words stuck. He knelt, pulling them close, their small bodies warm against his. I made a mistake," he muttered, his voice hoarse. The admission burned, but their innocent faces demanded it. As the twins hugged him, Robert's eyes drifted back to the phone, the frozen image of the shadowy figure lingering like a ghost. Someone knew more than they were saying, and he needed to find out who. "You don't get to hide from me!" Robert Carson's voice boomed as he shoved open the door to Riverfront Brew, his eyes blazing with a mix of guilt and desperation. His polished suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, a stark contrast to the confident businessman who'd berated Talia days ago. The video of her saving his twins, James and Liam, looped in his mind, each frame a lash against his pride. Her words, "Truth doesn't bend to your lies," stabbed deeper than he'd admit. He'd been wrong, and the blurry photo of that shadowy figure by the river, the one with the embroidered cloth, gnawed at him. Someone else was there, someone who didn't act. He needed answers, and he needed to face her. The cafe buzzed with lunchtime chatter, but the air shifted as Robert stormed in. Patrons froze mid-bite, their eyes darting to him. A waitress, her apron stained with coffee, flinched at his intensity. "Where's Talia?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the clatter of dishes. The waitress hesitated, her fingers tightening around a tray. "She's not here. Took a few days off after, you know." Her tone was sharp, her eyes accusing. Robert's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the counter. "Where is she now?" "Not your business," the waitress snapped, turning away. Robert's chest tightened, shame and frustration colliding. He'd humiliated Talia in front of everyone, called her a lowlife, and now her co-workers were closing ranks. He pushed past the counter, ignoring her protest, and scanned the room. A photo on the wall caught his eye. Talia smiling with the staff, her arm around a young boy. Her brother, maybe. His gut twisted. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone's daughter, someone's sister. He strode out, his shoes pounding the pavement, and headed to the address he'd pried from a reluctant manager. Talia's neighborhood was a world away from his gated estate. Cracked sidewalks, peeling paint, kids playing in the street. His Bentley looked out of place, drawing stares from neighbors. He knocked on a faded blue door, his heart racing. A woman answered, her face lined with exhaustion, her eyes narrowing. "You're the one who called my daughter a liar," she said, her voice cold as steel. Talia's mother. Robert's throat tightened, his usual confidence crumbling. "I need to see her. I was wrong." "She's not here," her mother said, arms crossed. "She's not your punching bag." Robert's fists clenched, not in anger, but in self-loathing. He'd seen the video, heard his son's words, James and Liam, their small voices pleading, "She saved us." He couldn't unsee it. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "I owe her an apology." The woman studied him, her gaze piercing. "You owe her more than that." She pointed down the street. "She's at the community center. Don't expect her to make it easy." Robert drove to the center, a squat building with a faded mural. Inside, he found Talia sorting canned goods for a food drive, her hands moving with purpose. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of his words from that day. He stepped forward, his throat dry. "Talia," he started, but she cut him off, her voice low and sharp. "What do you want, Mr. Carson?" Her fingers tightened around a can, her knuckles paling. "I was wrong," he said, forcing the words out. "I saw the video. My boys told me. You saved them." His voice cracked, his hands trembling. Talia's eyes locked onto his, unyielding. "You think saying sorry fixes it? You called me trash. In front of everyone." Her words were knives, each one precise. Robert flinched, his shoulders sagging. "I know. I let my fear, my bias, blind me." Talia set the can down, her movements deliberate. "Bias?" she said, her voice a whip. "You mean you saw my skin and decided I was a criminal?" Robert opened his mouth, but no words came. She was right. He judged her before she'd even spoken. The memory of that shadowy figure by the river flashed in his mind, the embroidered cloth haunting him. "There's something else," he said, pulling out his phone to show the blurry photo. "Someone was there, watching. I need to know who." Talia's eyes narrowed, her fingers brushing the phone screen. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, her voice steady but guarded. Robert met her gaze, his heart heavy. "Because I owe you the truth." Outside, a child's laugh echoed, sharp and fleeting, like a spark in the dark. "Keep your apologies," Talia snapped, her voice a blade cutting through Robert Carson's plea. She stood in the community center, surrounded by stacks of canned goods and worn-out chairs, her hands gripping a box of donations. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked onto his, daring him to push further. The sting of his accusations, lowlife, scammer, still burned, each word a bruise on her pride. Her fingers tightened, knuckles straining, as she shoved the box onto a shelf. Robert stood frozen, his phone still clutched in his hand, the blurry photo of the shadowy figure by the river glowing faintly on the screen. Talia turned away, her sneakers scuffing the linoleum floor, and moved to a table where kids from the neighborhood sat, their pencils scratching out homework. "Focus, Jamal," she said, her tone softening as she leaned over a boy struggling with math. Her hand steadied his shaking pencil, her smile warm but firm. "You've got this." The boy nodded, his eyes brightening. Talia's chest swelled, a quiet pride anchoring her. These kids, her brother included, were why she kept going, why she jumped into that river without a second thought. She caught a glimpse of herself in a cracked mirror on the wall, her hair pulled back, her face lined with exhaustion but fierce with resolve. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a sister, a daughter, a fighter. Her mother's long shifts cleaning offices, her brother's dreams of college, they fueled her. Robert's words had tried to strip that away, but she wouldn't let them. Her jaw clenched, teeth grinding, as she handed out snacks to the kids, her hands steady despite the storm inside. "Hey, Talia," a girl called, her braids swinging as she waved a drawing. "This is you saving those boys." The sketch showed a figure diving into waves, two small hands reaching out. Talia's throat tightened, her fingers brushing the paper. "That's real nice, Kyla," she said, her voice catching. The kids didn't see her as a victim. To them, she was a hero. Across the room, Jasmine, her best friend and fellow waitress, sorted clothes for the donation drive. "You okay?" Jasmine asked, her eyes flicking to Robert, who lingered awkwardly near the door. Talia's lips pressed tight, her shoulders squaring. "I'm fine," she said, her voice low but fierce. "He doesn't get to define me." Jasmine nodded, her hand squeezing Talia's arm. Damn right. You're stronger than his nonsense. Talia moved to the next table, helping a shy girl with her reading. Sound it out, Mia, she urged, her voice gentle but firm. The girl's face lit up as she nailed a word, and Talia's heart lifted, a spark cutting through the weight of Robert's accusations. She didn't need his validation. She was here, making a difference, just as she'd always done. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. You carry us, Talia. Don't ever forget that. As she stacked another box, her eyes caught Robert watching her, his face a mix of shame and awe. She didn't flinch, her gaze steady, challenging. She'd saved his sons, faced his venom, and still stood tall. Her fingers brushed the drawing Kyla gave her, tucked into her pocket, a reminder of who she was. Outside, the hum of the neighborhood buzzed, a faint rhythm of life that pulsed like a heartbeat, calling her forward. You think words erase what you did? Talia's voice slashed through the hum of the community center, her eyes drilling into Robert Carson's. She stood behind a table piled with donation boxes, her hands gripping the edge, knuckles pale with tension. Her heart pounded, the memory of his accusations, lowlife, scammer, still raw, like a wound that hadn't scabbed over. Robert, his suit rumpled, his face etched with guilt, stepped forward, his hands raised as if to ward off her anger. The kids around them paused, their pencils frozen, sensing the storm brewing. I'm sorry, Robert said, his voice hoarse, cracking under the weight of his shame. I saw the video. My boys. They told me you saved them. His eyes dropped, unable to hold her gaze. Talia's jaw tightened, her teeth grinding as she fought the urge to turn away. She'd seen his kind before, men with power who thought apologies fixed everything. Her mother's tired hands, her brother's guarded eyes flashed in her mind. She wasn't here for his pity. Sorry doesn't undo your words, she fired back, her voice low but sharp, each syllable a jab. You called me trash in front of everyone. You think I'm here for your money? Her fingers dug into the table, the wood creaking under her grip. The kids watched, wide-eyed, as Jasmine, nearby, folded her arms, her nod urging Talia on. Robert flinched, his shoulders sagging, but he didn't retreat. I was wrong, he said, his voice steadier now, forcing the words out. I let fear, prejudice, blind me. I want to make this right. He pulled out his phone, the blurry photo of the shadowy figure by the river glowing on the screen. This came to me. Someone was there, watching. I need your help to figure out who. Talia's eyes flicked to the photo, her pulse quickening. The embroidered mark on the cloth sparked a memory, something she'd seen before, maybe at the cafe. Why me? She snapped, her voice a challenge. You didn't trust me before. Why now? Robert's hands shook, his fingers tightening around the phone. Because you're the only one who cared enough to act. Her breath hitched, his words landing like a reluctant truth. She straightened, her eyes narrowing. If you want my trust, you do more than talk, she said, her voice cutting like glass. You want to make it right? Help the people you've looked down on. This community, my community, needs more than your guilt. Her hands swept toward the kids, their hopeful faces watching. Start there. Robert nodded, his face pale but resolute. I'll fund a scholarship for kids like them, like your brother. Talia's lips pressed tight, her heart warring between distrust and a flicker of hope. She didn't forgive him, not yet, but his offer was a start. Prove it, she said, her voice a whip. Actions, not promises. As he turned to leave, Talia's hand brushed her pocket, feeling Kyla's drawing from earlier. She paused, her fingers catching on something else, a small, damp piece of cloth tucked inside, unnoticed until now. She pulled it out, her breath catching. It was a handkerchief embroidered with the same mark as the one in Robert's photo. Her eyes widened, her pulse racing. She'd found it near the riverbank after saving the twins, stuffed in her pocket during the chaos. Who dropped this? She muttered, her voice barely audible. She glanced at Robert, now at the door, his back to her. Her fingers tightened around the cloth, its weight heavy with secrets. She didn't trust him fully, but this tied them together. Someone had been there, watching her risk everything, and they hadn't moved. Her eyes burned with determination, her grip on the cloth unyielding. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers, reaching for the truth. "You're making a fool of yourself, Carson," Carl's voice hissed, sharp as a snake's bite, as he leaned across Robert's desk. His gray eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto his boss, his lips curling into a sneer. The office air felt thick, charged with tension, as Robert sat rigid, his fingers gripping the arms of his chair. Talia's challenge, "Prove it. Actions, not promises," still burned in his mind, but Carl's sudden hostility cut deeper. The embroidered handkerchief, its mark matching the one in the blurry photo from that day at the river, sat heavy in Robert's pocket, a nagging clue to a truth he couldn't grasp. "You're throwing money at that waitress's pet project?" Carl spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "She's playing you. She staged that rescue to get into your wallet." His hand slammed the desk, papers scattering. Robert's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening. He'd seen the video, felt his son's trembling hands as they vouched for Talia. Carl's words echoed his own past accusations, but now they rang hollow, laced with something darker. "She saved my boys," Robert said, his voice low, steady but edged with warning. "You were there, Carl. You saw it." His eyes narrowed, searching his manager's face. Carl's sneer faltered, a flicker of unease crossing his features. He straightened, smoothing his tie, but his fingers twitched, betraying a crack in his composure. "Saw what?" Carl shot back, his tone sharp. "A nobody trying to be a hero? You're blind, Robert. She's trouble." His words were a jab, but his eyes darted to the side, avoiding Robert's gaze. Robert's pulse quickened, the memory of the shadowy figure by the river flashing in his mind. Carl had been at the cafe that day, lingering near the edge of the crowd, his dark jacket blending into the chaos. Was it him in the photo? "You didn't help," Robert said, his voice ablade. "My sons were drowning, and you just stood there." His accusation hung heavy, the air between them crackling. Carl's face hardened, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I wasn't close enough," he snapped, but his voice wavered, a lie teetering on the edge. Robert leaned forward, his fist clenching. "What's your angle, Carl?" His eyes flicked to the handkerchief in his pocket, the embroidered mark a silent question. Carl's sneer returned, but it was forced, his hands fidgeting. "You're digging your own grave, trusting her," he said, his voice low, menacing. "This scholarship nonsense? It'll ruin your reputation, and mine." The word "mine" hit Robert like a spark. Carl's ambition had always simmered, his push for control in their company's big real estate deal, his quiet resentment of Robert's success. Was the river incident a setup? Robert's stomach churned, his fingers brushing the handkerchief. "Get out," he said, his voice cold, final. Carl smirked, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear as he turned and strode out, his footsteps sharp against the floor. Robert sank back, his heart pounding. Carl's words, his evasion, felt like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't yet solve. He pulled out the handkerchief, its mark staring back at him, a silent accusation. Outside, the office window framed a darkening sky, the first drops of rain streaking down, mirroring the storm brewing within him. "Carl's hiding something," Talia hissed, her voice low, her eyes blazing as she shoved the embroidered handkerchief across the table. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from a fire igniting within her. She sat in a cramped diner booth, the vinyl seat creaking under her weight, facing Jasmine and Marcus, a local journalist with a knack for digging up dirt. The handkerchief, its strange mark matching the one in Robert's blurry photo, lay between them like a loaded gun. Carl's sneer from the cafe, his venomous words, "She's trouble," echoed in her mind, fueling her resolve. She'd saved 2 boys, taken Robert's insults, and now this cloth tied her to a truth she couldn't ignore. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her hands clenching her coffee mug. "He was there, Talia. I saw him by the river, just standing there." Her voice was sharp, her lips tight. "Didn't lift a finger while you were fighting the current." Talia's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding. Carl's inaction wasn't just cowardice. It felt deliberate, like a piece of a larger puzzle. Her heart pounded, the memory of the river's icy grip mixing with the sting of his accusations. Marcus leaned forward, his pen tapping the table, his brow furrowed. "This mark," he said, tracing the embroidery with a finger. "I've seen it before, on a jacket in the cafe's Lost and Found." His voice was low, urgent, his eyes flicking to Talia. "Carl's jacket." Talia's pulse spiked, her fist tightening. "You sure?" she asked, her voice ablade. Marcus nodded, pulling out his phone to show a photo he'd snapped weeks ago. A dark jacket with the same embroidered mark, left behind after a staff meeting. "We need more," Talia said, her voice steady but fierce. She wasn't just fighting for herself now. The kids at the community center, her brother's dreams, her mother's sacrifices, they all pushed her forward. She stood, her sneakers scuffing the diner floor, and grabbed the handkerchief. "Let's start at the cafe." They slipped into Riverfront Brew after closing, the dim light casting shadows across empty tables. Talia's hands moved fast, rifling through the lost and found bin behind the counter. Her fingers brushed worn scarves, forgotten hats, until they closed around a heavy jacket. She pulled it out, her breath catching. The embroidered mark stared back at her, identical to the handkerchiefs. "Carl's," she muttered, her heart racing. Jasmine's eyes widened, her hand gripping Talia's arm. "He was there, Talia, watching." Marcus crouched by the manager's office, jimmied the lock with a credit card. "Got something," he whispered, pulling out a stack of papers. Talia and Jasmine crowded around as he flipped through them. An email printout caught their eye. It was from Carl to a rival developer, dated the day before the river incident. "Carson's distracted. Push the deal now," it read. Talia's stomach churned, her fingers tightening on the jacket. "He wanted Robert out of the picture," she said, her voice low, furious. "The boys were just collateral." Jasmine's face hardened, her fists clenching. "He let them drown to screw Robert over?" Her voice was a whip, her eyes blazing. Talia nodded, her jaw tight. "He didn't count on me." Her words were steel, her resolve unyielding. She jumped into that river without hesitation, and now she'd dive into this fight with the same fire. Marcus kept digging, pulling up an old security log from the cafe's system. "Look at this," he said, his finger jabbing at the screen. Carl had clocked out early that day, but his keycard swiped near the riverbank entrance minutes before the twins fell. Talia's pulse thundered, her hands shaking as she clutched the handkerchief. "He was right there," she said, her voice barely a whisper, rage simmering beneath. They stepped outside, the night air sharp against their skin. Talia's eyes scanned the riverbank, the same spot where she'd saved James and Liam. Her fingers traced the embroidery, her mind racing. "We need to find who sent Robert that photo," she said, her voice firm. Marcus nodded, his phone already out, texting a contact. "I know a guy who can trace the number, but it'll take time." Jasmine grabbed Talia's shoulder, her grip fierce. "You're not doing this alone," she said, her eyes locked on Talia's. "We're with you." Talia's chest tightened, a surge of gratitude cutting through her anger. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a fighter, backed by people who believed in her. Her fingers closed around the handkerchief, its weight a promise of justice. As they walked away, Talia glanced back at the river, its surface glinting under the streetlights. Something caught her eye, a scrap of paper tucked under a rock, half buried in the mud. She knelt, her heart pounding, and pulled it free. It was a torn note, the handwriting jagged, with one word scrawled in ink. Betrayal. The river's current roared, a warning of secrets yet to surface. "Carl set them up." Talia's voice cracked like a whip, her hands shaking as she clutched the torn note. The word betrayal scrawled in jagged ink. She stood in Marcus's cluttered apartment, the dim light casting shadows across stacks of papers and a flickering laptop screen. Jasmine paced behind her, fists clenched, her breath sharp with fury. The embroidered handkerchief, Carl's jacket, the email to a rival developer, and the security log all pointed to a chilling truth. Talia's heart pounded, her jaw tight as the pieces snapped into place. She'd saved James and Liam, but Carl had wanted them to fall. Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard, his eyes narrowed. "Got it," he said, his voice low, urgent. He spun the laptop, revealing a grainy audio file sent by his contact. a former employee of Carl's. Talia hit play, her pulse thundering. Carl's voice, cold and calculated, filled the room. Let Carson's kids wander. A scare will shake him. We'll close the deal before he recovers. The words hit like a punch, Talia's knuckles whitening as she gripped the table. He used them, she hissed, her voice raw, her eyes blazing. He let those boys drown for a damn deal. Her chest heaved, the memory of the river's icy pull flooding back, her arms straining, the twins' terrified gas. She'd risked everything, and Carl had stood by, plotting. Jasmine slammed her hand on the table, her face twisted with rage. He's a monster, she spat. We nail him. Marcus leaned back, his fingers drumming the table. This audio's gold, but there's more. The note, it's from Sarah, Carl's old assistant. She sent Robert that photo. He pulled up an email from Sarah, her words rushed, fearful. Carl planned it. He wanted Robert distracted. I saw him drop the ball near the river. Talia's breath caught, her fingers tracing the note's jagged edges. Sarah had been there, watching, too scared to act until now. The embroidered handkerchief was Carl's, dropped in his haste to flee the scene. Talia's blood boiled, her nails biting into her palms. Carl hadn't just failed to help, he'd orchestrated the danger, banking on tragedy to ruin Robert and secure his own power. Her eyes flicked to Jasmine, then Marcus, their faces set with determination. He doesn't get away with this, she said, her voice steel, her resolve unyielding. She'd faced Robert's venom, carried her community's hopes, and now she held the truth in her hands. Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. We take this to Robert tomorrow. Talia's fingers closed around the note, its weight a promise of justice. She'd jumped into that river for two boys she didn't know, and now she'd dive into this fight for them, for herself, for everyone Carl had tried to bury. As she stepped toward the door, her sneakers firm against the floor, a faint buzz came from her phone. A new message from an unknown number. Meet me. I know more. Her heart skipped, her eyes narrowing at the glowing screen. You've got nothing on me, Carl's voice roared, his eyes wild as he loomed over Talia in the dim basement office of Carson Enterprises. His hands slammed the desk, the impact rattling a stack of files. Talia stood firm, her heart pounding, her fingers clutching the torn note with betrayal scrawled in jagged ink. The audio file, Carl's cold voice plotting to use the twins near drowning for his own gain, burned in her mind. She'd come to confront him, armed with Sarah's email and the embroidered handkerchief, but Carl's fury was a storm she hadn't anticipated. Her jaw clenched, teeth grinding, as she faced the man who'd let James and Liam slip into danger. You set them up, Talia said, her voice sharp, cutting through his rage. You dropped that ball by the river. You wanted Robert distracted. Her eyes locked onto his, unyielding, her fingers tightening around the note. Carl's face twisted, a sneer curling his lips. You're out of your league, Waitress, he spat, stepping closer, his breath hot with menace. Keep poking, and you'll regret it. Talia's pulse raced, her fist balling at her sides. She'd saved those boys, taken Robert's insults, and now stood inches from a man who'd gambled with their lives. I've got proof, she said, her voice steady, a blade. Your voice on tape. Your deal with the rival. Sarah saw you. Her words hit like punches and Carl's eyes flickered, a crack in his armor. Lie, he barked, cutting her off. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist, twisting hard. Pain flared, but Talia didn't flinch, her other hand shoving the handkerchief in his face. This is yours, she hissed, her voice a whip. You dropped it when you ran. Carl's grip tightened, his face paling, but his sneer held. You think anyone will believe you over me? He growled, yanking her closer. You're nobody. Her heart thundered, but her eyes burned with defiance. I'm enough to stop you, she said, wrenching her wrist free, her nails scraping his skin. She stepped back, her sneakers scraping the concrete floor, but Carl lunged, shoving her against a filing cabinet. The metal clanged, her shoulder throbbing from the impact. You don't walk away from this, he snarled, his hand reaching for the note in her grip. Talia's breath hitched, her mind racing. She'd faced the river's pull, Robert's venom. She wouldn't break now. Back off, she shouted, her voice echoing in the cramped space. Her knee jerked up, catching Carl's thigh, forcing him to stumble. She darted for the door, but he grabbed a heavy ledger from the desk, hurling it at her. It grazed her arm, pain shooting through her, but she kept moving, her fingers still clutching the note. The door was locked, Carl's doing. Her chest tightened, her eyes scanning for an escape. "You're done," Carl said, his voice low, predatory, as he advanced. Talia's hand found a metal pipe leaning against the wall, her grip tightening. "Not yet," she snapped, raising the pipe, her eyes fierce. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Jasmine, probably, after Talia's hurried text for backup. She just needed to hold out. Carl hesitated, his eyes flicking to the pipe, his sneer wavering. Talia's heart pounded, her resolve steel. She jumped into a river for 2 kids she didn't know, faced a crowd's judgment, and now stared down a man who tried to ruin them all. Her fingers tightened on the pipe, her stance unwavering. Outside, footsteps echoed faintly, growing louder, a promise of rescue cutting through the dark. "Open the door, Carl!" Jasmine's voice thundered through the basement office door, her fist pounding the metal, each bang a jolt to Talia's racing heart. She gripped the metal pipe, her knuckles white, her shoulder throbbing from the filing cabinet's impact. Carl's eyes, wild with panic, darted between her and the door, his sneer crumbling. The torn note, betrayal, was still clutched in her hand, its jagged ink a testament to his scheme. She'd faced the river's pull, Robert's venom, and now Carl's trap, but her resolve burned hotter than ever. Her sneakers scraped the concrete, her stance firm as she held the pipe high. "Back off!" Talia snapped, her voice a blade, cutting through Carl's predatory advance. Her phone buzzed again, Marcus probably, rushing to join Jasmine after her desperate text. Carl lunged for the note, his fingers grazing her wrist, but she swung the pipe, forcing him to stumble back. The door rattled, Jasmine's shouts growing louder. "Talia, hold on!" With a grunt, Talia shoved a chair against the door, buying time. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on Carl's desk, cluttered with files and a laptop left open. Her pulse spiked. She needed evidence, something undeniable. She darted to the desk, her hands trembling but swift, yanking open drawers. Carl's face twisted, his voice a growl. "You're dead if you touch that." "Try me," Talia shot back, her voice steel, her fingers ripping through papers. Her heart pounded, the memory of Carl's audio. "Let Carson's kids wander," fueling her fury. She'd saved James and Liam, taken Robert's insults, and now she was inches from the truth. Her hand closed around a USB drive, tucked in a drawer, its label scrawled with "Deal Docs." She shoved it into her pocket, her eyes flicking to Carl. He charged, his shoulder slamming into her, knocking her against the wall. Pain flared, but her grip on the note tightened, her resolve unyielding. The door burst open, Jasmine and Marcus storming in. Jasmine grabbed Carl's arm, twisting it hard, her face fierce. "Get off her!" she roared, shoving him back. Marcus, his camera phone already recording, caught Carl's panicked expression. "Got you," Marcus said, his voice low, sharp. Talia scrambled to her feet, her breath ragged, her fingers still clutching the USB. "Check his laptop," she said, her voice urgent, pointing to the glowing screen. Marcus dove in, his fingers flying across the keys. "Passwords cracked," he said, his eyes narrowing as files loaded. An email chain appeared, Carl's name glaring in the sender line, addressed to a rival developer. "Carson's out of the game after the river incident. Push the contract now," one read. Another, dated the day of the incident, detailed Carl's plan. "Kids near the water. Easy distraction." Talia's stomach churned, her fists clenching. "He planned it all," she said, her voice low, furious. "He used those boys." Jasmine's eyes blazed, her hand still gripping Carl's arm. "You're scum," she spat, her voice a whip. Carl yanked free, his face pale, his hands shaking. "You can't prove anything," he stammered, but his voice cracked, his confidence shattered. Marcus held up the USB, his lips curling. "This says otherwise." Talia's chest heaved, her eyes burning with determination. She jumped into a river for 2 kids, faced a crowd's judgment, and now held the key to Carl's downfall. "We take this to Robert," she said, her voice steady, commanding. Tomorrow at the community event. Her fingers tightened around the USB, its weight a promise of justice. Marcus nodded, slipping the drive into his pocket. We'll need backup. This'll blow up. Jasmine grabbed Talia's hand, her grip fierce. You're unstoppable, she said, her eyes shining with pride. Talia's lips twitched, not quite a smile, her heart still racing. She'd fought her way out of Carl's trap, just as she'd fought the river's pull. Her shoulder ached, her wrist bruised, but her spirit was iron. As they left the basement, Carl's defeated slump burned into her memory. Outside, the night air hit her face sharp and cold. Talia glanced at the USB in Marcus's hand, then at the note in her own. Its single word, betrayal, a spark ready to ignite. Across the street, a crowd gathered for the community event, their voices a faint hum, waiting for the truth to break free. You're done, Carl! Talia's voice rang out, sharp as a blade, cutting through the hum of the community center's packed auditorium. Her hands gripped the podium, knuckles pale, the USB drive and torn note, betrayal, burning in her pocket. The crowd, a mix of locals, Robert Carson, and his twins, James and Liam, stared up at her, their faces a sea of anticipation. Her heart pounded, her shoulders still throbbing from Carl's attack in the basement, but her eyes blazed with fire. She'd saved 2 boys, faced a river's wrath, and now she'd tear down a liar. Carl stood near the stage, his face pale, his sneer faltering as Talia raised the USB. This, she said, her voice steady, proves you set up the twins' accident. The crowd gasped, heads turning. Robert's eyes widened, his fists clenching. Talia nodded to Marcus, who plugged the drive into a laptop, projecting Carl's email onto a screen. Carson's out of the game after the river incident. Push the contract now, it read. Murmurs erupted, sharp and angry. You let those boys drown for a deal, Talia snapped, her voice a whip, pointing at Carl. Her chest heaved, the memory of the river's icy grip fueling her rage. You dropped the ball, watched them fall, and blamed me. Her words sliced through the air, each one a blow. Carl's hands shook, his eyes darting to the exits. Lies, he shouted, his voice cracking. She's a nobody. Jasmine stepped forward, her face fierce, holding up her phone. Not anymore, she said, hitting play. Carl's voice filled the room, cold and calculated. Let Carson's kids wander. A scare will shake him. The crowd roared, some standing, their shouts drowning Carl's protests. James and Liam, seated beside Robert, clutched their father's hands, their faces pale but resolute. She saved us, James said, his small voice cutting through the chaos. Liam nodded. You didn't. Robert stood, his jaw tight, his eyes burning into Carl. You used my sons, he growled, his voice low, lethal. You're finished. The crowd's anger swelled, a woman in the back yelling, Get him out! Talia's fingers tightened on the podium, her breath steady despite the storm inside. She'd faced Carl's threats, Robert's insults, and now stood tall, the truth her weapon. Carl stumbled back, his face ashen, his hands raised as if to ward off the crowd's fury. You can't prove it, he stammered. But Marcus held up the handkerchief, its embroidered mark glaring under the lights. This is yours, he said, his voice sharp. Found by the river. Sarah saw you drop it. The crowd's shouts grew louder, a tidal wave of outrage. Carl turned, bolting for the door, but security blocked his path, their hands firm. Talia's eyes met Robert's, a silent understanding passing between them. She'd fought for this moment, for justice, for the boys she'd pulled from the river. Her heart swelled, not with pride but with purpose. As Carl was led away, the crowd's applause thundered, a few hands reaching out to touch her shoulder. She stood firm, her gaze fixed on the screen, the email still glowing. Outside, the river's current roared, a faint echo of victory calling for justice to be sealed. You're fired, Carl! Robert Carson's voice sliced through the boardroom, his eyes blazing as he slammed a termination letter onto the table. Carl, pale and sweating, stood frozen, his hands trembling as security flanked him. The USB drive's evidence, emails, audio, the embroidered handkerchief, had been handed to the police, and now Carl faced charges for reckless endangerment. Talia stood at the room's edge, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. Her heart pounded, not with triumph but with relief. She'd fought the river, faced Carl's threats, and now watched him fall. "You can't do this," Carl sputtered, his voice cracking, his sneer gone. "I made this company." Robert leaned forward, his fists clenched. "You used my sons," he growled, his voice low, lethal. "You're done." The board members, their faces grim, nodded in agreement. Carl's scheme to sabotage Robert's focus, with the twins near drowning for a rival deal, was laid bare. The police report confirmed it. Sarah's testimony, the emails, the security log, all airtight. Talia's fingers brushed the torn note in her pocket. Betrayal. Its weight lighter now. She'd exposed Carl not just for herself, but for James and Liam, for her community. Her chest tightened, her eyes flicking to Robert. He met her gaze, his nod brief but heavy with respect. "It's over," he said, his voice softer now. Talia's lips pressed tight, her heart steady. "It better be," she replied, her voice sharp, unyielding. As security led Carl out, his shoulders slumped, his footsteps dragging. The boardroom doors closed with a thud, sealing his fate. Talia's hands unclenched, her breath steadying. She'd carried the truth through a storm of lies, and now it stood tall. Her mother's words echoed. "You carry us, Talia." She had, and she would keep carrying. Outside, the community center's lights glowed, a beacon for the work ahead. Talia stepped toward the door, her sneakers firm, ready to build something new from the ashes of betrayal. "This is for you, Talia," Robert Carson's voice boomed, his hands gripping a microphone as he stood before a packed crowd at the newly renovated community center. His eyes, once clouded with prejudice, now shone with purpose. His suit crisp, but his posture humbled. Talia stood beside him, her arms crossed, her heart pounding with a mix of pride and caution. The memory of his accusations, lowlife, scammer, still stung, but Carl's downfall, sealed by the police and the boardroom's verdict, had shifted something in Robert. Her fingers brushed the torn note in her pocket. Betrayal, a reminder of the fight she'd won. Now she faced a new challenge, trusting his redemption. Robert raised a plaque, the words Talia Williams Scholarship Fund gleaming under the lights. "This fund," he said, his voice steady, "will support kids from every corner of this town, starting with those who've been overlooked." The crowd roared, their applause thundering. Talia's jaw tightened, her eyes scanning the faces. Kids like her brother, mothers like hers, all watching with hope. Her chest swelled, not with forgiveness, but with possibility. She jumped into a river, faced a liar's threats, and now stood as a beacon for change. "You're not just funding this," Talia said, stepping to the mic, her voice sharp, commanding. "You're building it with us." Her words cut through the cheers, her gaze locking onto Robert's. "This isn't charity, it's justice." Her hands clenched, knuckles paling, as she spoke. "Kids like these, they deserve a shot, not a handout." The crowd hushed, her conviction silencing them. A woman in the front, her eyes glistening, nodded fiercely. Robert stepped back, his nod brief but heavy. "You're right," he said, his voice low, raw. "I'm learning. From you." He gestured to a table where blueprints lay spread out, a plan to rebuild the community center into a hub for free education, mentorship, and job training, focused on Black and underserved youth. Talia's heart raced, her fingers twitching with purpose. She'd demanded action, and Robert was delivering. Millions pledged, his company's resources poured into the project. Jasmine, standing nearby, grabbed Talia's hand, her grip fierce. "You did this!" she whispered, her eyes blazing with pride. Talia's lips pressed tight, her throat tight. She thought of her mother, scrubbing floors late into the night, her brother studying under a flickering lamp. This was for them, for every kid who'd been told they were less. Talia took the mic again, her voice steady but fierce. "This center," she said, her hands sweeping toward the crowd, "is ours. We build it together. For our kids, our future." Her words landed like sparks, igniting cheers. A young girl clutching a notebook waved at Talia, her smile wide. Talia's chest tightened, a surge of protectiveness washing over her. She'd faced a river, a liar, a crowd's judgment. She'd face this too. Robert joined her, his hand extended. Co-director, he said, his voice firm. Run it with me. Talia hesitated, her eyes searching his. She saw sincerity, but her guard stayed up. I'll run it, she said, her voice ablade. But it's for them, not you. She shook his hand, her grip iron, sealing the deal. The crowd erupted, their applause a tidal wave. As Robert stepped aside, Talia's eyes caught her brother in the crowd, his face lit with pride. Her mother stood beside him, her hands clasped, her smile fierce. Talia's heart swelled, her resolve unyielding. She'd turned pain into power, lies into truth. Her fingers brushed the plaque, its cool surface grounding her. Outside, the community center's new sign glowed, its light cutting through the dusk, a promise of hope built on the ruins of betrayal. We're building a future, not just a center. Talia's voice soared, sharp and unwavering, as she stood at the podium of the newly opened Talia Williams Community Center. Her hands gripped the microphone, knuckles steady, her eyes blazing with purpose. The crowd, hundreds of faces, from her mother's tear-streaked smile to her brother's proud grin, cheered, their applause a thunderous wave. She'd fought a river's pull, faced Carl's threats, endured Robert's venom, and now stood tall, a beacon for her town. Her heart pounded, not with fear but with a fire that refused to dim. The plaque behind her, etched with her name, gleamed under the lights, a testament to her journey. Her gaze swept the room, landing on James and Liam, the twins she'd saved, sitting beside Robert Carson. Their small hands waved, their faces bright with gratitude. Robert stood, his suit crisp but his posture humbled, his eyes meeting hers with respect. Talia, he said, stepping to the mic, his voice raw, you showed me what courage looks like. He paused, his throat tight. This center, this fund, it's your legacy. The crowd roared, their cheers shaking the walls. Talia's jaw clenched, her chest swelling with a mix of pride and caution. She demanded action, and he delivered. Millions for scholarships, a rebuilt center for kids like her brother, for families like hers. I didn't do this alone, Talia said, her voice cutting through the noise, steady as steel. This is for us, all of us. Her hand swept toward the crowd, toward Jasmine, who stood with arms crossed, her smile fierce, toward Marcus, his camera flashing, capturing the moment, toward the kids from the neighborhood, their eyes wide with dreams. Her mother, hands clasped, nodded, her face glowing with quiet strength. Talia's brother, now a scholarship recipient, clutched a college acceptance letter, his grin unstoppable. Her heart tightened, her fingers brushing the torn note in her pocket. Betrayal. Now a relic of a fight she'd won. She stepped forward, her sneakers firm on the stage. I jumped into that river for two boys I didn't know, she said, her voice a blade slicing through the air. I faced lies, hate, and danger. But I stood up, and so can you. Her words landed like sparks, igniting the crowd. A young girl clutching a notebook shouted, You're my hero, Talia. The room erupted, hands clapping, voices rising. Talia's throat caught, her eyes stinging, but she held her head high, her resolve iron. Robert joined her, his hand extended. You've changed this town, he said, his voice low, earnest. You've changed me. Talia shook his hand, her grip strong, her eyes searching his. She saw no trace of the man who'd called her lowlife. Keep changing, she said, her voice sharp but hopeful. For them. She nodded toward the kids, toward James and Liam, who ran up, their arms wrapping around her. You saved us, Liam said, his voice small but clear. James nodded. You're the best. Talia knelt, pulling them close, her heart swelling with a protectiveness that felt like family. Jasmine stepped up, her hand squeezing Talia's shoulder. You built this, she said, her voice fierce with pride. Marcus, still snapping photos, grinned. The world's gonna know your name, he said, his eyes bright. Talia's lips twitched, not quite a smile, her chest tight with gratitude. Her mother approached, her hands cupping Talia's face. You carried us, she whispered, her voice breaking. Talia hugged her breath hitching, the weight of years, her mother's late-night shifts, her brother's struggles, lifting in that embrace. The crowd began to disperse, but Talia lingered, her eyes scanning the room. The center buzzed with life, kids laughing, mentors planning, hope alive in every corner. Her brother, now dreaming of engineering, chatted with a teacher. Her mother, honored with a volunteer role, organized supplies. The twins, safe and smiling, clung to Robert, who nodded at Talia, a silent vow to keep learning. This was her family new, not bound by blood but by courage, truth, and shared purpose. Talia stepped outside, the river's hum a familiar pulse. She stood where she'd saved the twins, her hands steady, her heart full. Courage isn't just one act, she said, her voice soft but firm, speaking to the night. It's every day, every fight, every truth. Her words carried a lesson. Courage and kindness can shatter prejudice, and unity can rebuild a broken world. Her fingers brushed the plaque's name, her name, etched for generations to come. As she walked back inside, the center's lights glowed, voices rising in laughter and plans. Talia's steps were sure, her spirit unbreakable. She'd faced a river, a liar, a town's doubt, and emerged stronger. Her legacy wasn't just a building, it was hope, carved from struggle, shining for all who dared to stand. The river flowed on, its current a song of resilience, carrying her story far beyond the bank. This story of Talia teaches us that courage and kindness can shatter prejudice, proving that truth and unity can transform lives and communities. No matter the odds, standing up for what's right sparks change that ripples far beyond a single act. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you faced a moment where courage made a difference? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's inspire each other. Thank you for watching, for believing in hope, and for being part of this journey. See you in the next video.